How does one look at a city, and from where? There is always a viewpoint. It appears in time and accompanies the history of a place from the moment it starts to have one. At first, a city is simply a place surrounded by walls, a perimeter to oppose the nature around, a group of houses. Faint features, fantastic skylines, good in any circumstances. First, a city must be built and given a soul, a shape. Then we can start looking at it, finding a point from which to look. When we went up into the hills, states Guido Piovene, we could see Vicenza, drawn in the shape of a scorpion slightly curled upon itself with its pincers open towards the east. The same thing had been written by Silvestro Castellini at the beginning of the 17th century. Now the city has grown, we cannot see that shape anymore. Even before, it was only visible from the hills of Monte Berico, so close to the walls. The first modern glance of the city is from above. At the end of the Middle Ages, when a view of the city was requested, the Vicentinis found it here. Painters paint Vicenza from here. This came about for religious reasons and for visual and pictorial motives. From the slopes of Monte Berico, one can imagine looking upon the city as the Virgin Mary may have done when she appeared on the mountain in 1426 to save Vicenza from a plague. In fact, the view from there leaves one agape, wrote Goethe, as other 18th century travelers such as Count Caylus and Abbot Richard did before him. In other words, there is no better spot from which to see the old towers, the bell towers, and the huge upset keel of Palazzo della Ragione. Since the start of the modern era, pilgrims, painters, and travelers haven't stopped watching the city from there. What can their eyes see? What could they see? We are answered by Guglielmo, the English architect protagonist of Forestiere Istruito, a popular guide to the city of 1761. They saw the view of the city and the great plain sown with churches, palaces, and houses up to the foot of the mountains. When talking of Vicenza, one is always drawn to the architecture, wrote Charles de Brosse a few years earlier. That's why one comes to Vicenza to admire its architecture, starting with the Palladian works. When in London, Francesco Zuccarelli paints an ideal view of Vicenza for a demanding tourist. In the middle of the scene, on the slopes of Monte Berico, the great English architect Inigo Jones appears along with his patron. He is talking with Palladio and exchanging projects which deserve respect, if only for their origin in Vicenza. The people of Vicenza realize this. Since the mid-1700s, architecture has been a sort of explicit logo, a definitive brand of quality. Its importance, though, had been realized a couple of centuries earlier. The beautiful Pianta Angelica of 1580 in the Vatican Map Gallery allows Vicenza to be ranked among the most important cities in Italy, but it is also the testimony of an ever-improving urban weave. According to Giorgio Vasari, the Palladian buildings alone are enough to create a highly honored city and a wonderful province. The urban landscapes follow one another, offering new and interesting viewpoints. Vicenza has lots to show off. Architecture is therefore the protagonist. Architecture that boasts at least 5 centuries of high achievements, where new works unite with earlier ones, with harmonious continuity. And thus Vicenza became the city of palaces. Strewn with palaces, wrote Hofmannsthal after wandering the city in 1903. To celebrate the visit of Pope Pio VI in 1782, a tablet speaks of Clarem Edificis Urbem, of a place famous for its buildings. a place that is an open-air museum of architecture, of which the perspectives of Teatro Olimpico offer an excellent synopsis. When Pope Pio saw it, it was said that, being accustomed to Rome's numerous beauties, he was nonetheless left agape by such a magnificent discovery. Jérôme de Lalande invited all the young European architects to Vicenza, saying they should stay in this city to study the purity of the style and perfection of the proportions. The same happened before Palladio. In 1525, a traveller from the Italian region Marche described a superbly styled Vicenza in great detail. During the last part of the Gothic period, there was a boom of buildings that rivaled their Venetian contemporaries. Superb, historiated palaces with flaming facades of fine gold, rich in reliefs and paintings. As numerous as the noble houses, the list of which entirely occupies 2 octaves in Dragonzino da Fano's pages. Decorated with vibrant frescoes, they hold their own when compared to the great churches, such as Santa Corona treasure chest of paintings and the Duomo that raises its proud forehead with red and white marbles which seem to form roses, a city of color. It is the private architecture that really surpasses the seats of public power, as shown by a rough map of 1481. The city has only known political autonomy for the briefest of periods throughout its history. The aristocratic elite do not govern, and perhaps because of this, they want to compensate themselves with houses fit for rulers. Andrea Palladio understands this well. At the beginning of his treatise, he writes that Vicenza isn't big but rich, and that his patrons wish to abandon the outdated practice of constructing without grace and beauty in any form, to follow the new trend that Andrea himself proposes. Palladio creates more than 10 palaces in the historic center, although none will be completed by the architect himself. Each is different from the others. Andrea insists on this. Each noble patron has the right to his own dream of stone and brick, to something corresponding to specific needs and with unique features. As Goethe observes, he managed to give them a great impression of themselves. He could make them feel the magnificence of a great life. With respect to the Gothic city that preceded it, this was a great turnabout. After Palladio's death, Vicenza becomes a destination for travelers with an enthusiasm for architecture, most wanting to get an up-close look of his inventions, as did Inigo Jones, who took the lessons learnt back to England. If these works are not seen in their own settings, writes Goethe, one doesn't have the true concept. Or better still, one can get it by flicking through the pages of Palladio's treatise. This is done throughout Europe, as many opportune editions and translations show. And one can extract an image of paradoxical synthesis looking at the Scamozzian perspectives of the Teatro Olimpico. Paradoxical because Scamozzi produced them almost as a mockery of Palladio, to show the people that his inventions made a Vicenza that was new only in the transient virtuality of a scene with plaster and papier-mâché. This severe criticism became a boomerang. The Austrian Emperor Joseph II needed only 5 minutes in the Olimpico to have a sufficient image of the city. This doesn't mean that architecture in Vicenza stays Palladian after Andrea's death. Scamozzi's perspectives may turn out to be a boomerang, but only for foreigners. The people of Vicenza continue to appreciate his projects for more than a century, a very much longer approval than that reserved for Palladio. The people of Vicenza embrace Scamozzi's proposal, also developed by Antonio Pizzoccaro, to eliminate the many diverse heroic Palladian inventions and to supply nobles with palaces worthy of their rank. A status symbol of their class, but almost all identical and marked by the homologating Ser Liana. Palladio delivered his patrons the variety of magnificence, whereas Scamozzi promoted common dignity for nearly all of the 17th century. After a lengthy oblivion, the 1700s sees the return of the teachings of Palladio. From this point on, the images of Vicenza will concentrate on his buildings and those inspired by him. It is another great period which corresponds to a sensitive growth of the urban weave. New protagonists: Muttoni, Massari, Arnaldi, Bertotti, Scamozzi, Calderari. Among the greatest of Veneto in the 1700s, new neighborhoods, new palaces which resume the variety of Palladio's imagery, the projections of volumes, the strong use of light and dark, and give life to an architecture that is less abstractly scientific and more material. The season of Palladian architecture begins and is a worldwide phenomenon, the only architectural style that derives from the name of the artist. But we mustn't think of this as purely copying Palladian inventions. More than a century has passed since the end of the Renaissance. One must translate that lesson, and Vicenza becomes a sort of highly advanced school where one can study and create modern architecture. Goethe understands this perfectly. If I should follow my desires, I would stay here for a month. I would follow a quick course in architecture and then continue at peace with myself. Palladian villas begin appearing outside Vicenza even before this. He himself reports this in his treatise regarding the Rotonda that is not included in the villas section due to its proximity to the city, such that one can say it is in the city itself. But the Rotonda is not the first or last. The same applies for Gian Giorgio Trissino's villa in Criccoli, where Andrea della Gondola receives the demanding nickname of Palladio, to the Bertesina villas, to Villa Valmarana on the slopes of Monte Berico, extraordinarily frescoed by Tiepolos Jr. and Senior. The urban villas are a sign that in Vicenza the architecture is always integrated with nature, by parks and gardens, by hills that begin just beyond the walls. The sign that the city expands naturally in its surroundings, surroundings that travelers in the 18th century considered to be the most beautiful in all of Europe. In Palladio's designs, there is something truly divine, or so said Goethe. It is his capacity to interpret classical architecture in modern terms. His villas make use of every element of ancient temples, tympanum, columns, dome, and loggias. Hofmannsthal writes that they are houses for the gods, and in describing the Rotonda says it is a building constructed for such pleasure that it seems destined not for men but gods. And if they be men that dwell here, they must have something divine in their blood to endure a residence such as this. In fact, the walls and ceilings are so covered with divine depictions that men and gods are often separated by only a few meters. These temple villas celebrate nature, the territory that Palladian architecture accepts like no other. Work is celebrated, a new society which imposes itself with the force of agriculture rather than weapons. No one before Palladio was able to show with such force an architecture which foretells the future. Those that succeed me will, by my example, be able to easily reduce the magnificence of their constructions to the true beauty and loveliness of old. It is an architecture that, in both city and countryside alike, privileges private residences and confers a public dignity, an immediately recognizable prestige. It is an architecture that rereads from the past and throws open the future, that offers residences for a new leading class, for a new society. This is the basis of the international success of Palladian imagery that spreads through Protestant countries in the north of Europe such as England and through rebel colonies which will become the United States of America. Its influence can also be seen in St. Petersburg's palaces and the Tsar's residences. A human measure, a divine breath, a new frontier underlines Goethe, which is born in Vicenza to span each continent over 500 years and still today. Tomorrow I leave Vicenza, writes Goethe, and I do so unwillingly. For me, there are too many things here.